In today's video, I'm going to be doing a tier list ranking every card in Clash Royale for the month of March. Since the last tier list, there has been a lot of balance changes and also 2 new evolutions added to the game. So the meta is significantly different now, and there has been a lot of changes since the last one. S tier is the highest rank a card can receive. It means the card is very versatile, or it is just very powerful, and there's a high chance it could use a nerf as well. A tier means the card is well above average, but probably doesn't quite need a nerf. B tier is kind of the higher end of average. It's a pretty good card. C is kind of average or the low end of average. D means the card is below average and probably not that versatile. And then F tier means there's a high chance the card needs a buff or it is just not really versatile at all. Starting things off here with the archers, I'm going to put them in C tier. Keep in mind, these are the regular archers, not the evolved. All the evolved cards I'm going to rank at the end. I think the regular archers are pretty decent inside of things like Expo and Giant Graveyard, but you don't really see them in decks outside of those things. And also, I think the main reason people use the regular archers is to eventually cycle to the evolved ones, because the regular ones are kind of weak and they die to things so easily, such as arrows. Speaking of arrows, I'm going to put them into A tier. Definitely one of the stronger spells in the game right now. It's very versatile. You can use it in Lava, Giant Graveyard, so heavier decks. You could also use them inside of Mortar decks, Recruit decks, off-meta decks, so lots of different things you can use them in. And because of the large radius, it's going to get value multiple times throughout the match, and it's just really good against spammy type of decks. The Baby Dragon, I'm going to put in C tier. It can be kind of decent in some situations. It's sometimes beneficial to have a Flying Splash card, but I think overall it doesn't pair that well in too many decks. Sometimes you'll see it inside a Graveyard or Golem. It can be very useful, but I think there's a lot of flying cards that are better than it currently. The Balloon, I'm going to put in B tier. I feel like it's a pretty average win condition right now. It's of course pretty good inside of Lava Hounds. You could use Loon Cycle or even Recruit's Loon, but there's so many effective ways to stop it because there's so many people running Tornado, also buildings, air counters in general, and even the Cannoneer is pretty good against it, so I don't think it's anything too crazy at the moment. The Bandit, I'll say, is around B tier. It's pretty good in spammy decks, especially inside of P.E.K.K.A, which of course made a bit of a comeback because it got a range buff, but also inside of Mega Knight Wall Breakers is where you'll commonly see the Bandit, and then of course in things like 3M, so lots of bridge spam decks, but overall not that difficult to distract and deal with. The Barbell is going to join the arrows in A tier. It's a very versatile spell because you can use it in pretty much every beatdown deck you can think of. It's also good inside of control decks like Graveyard. You can use it defensively because you have that Barbarian helping out. You can use it on offense to just try to get a tiny bit of chip damage, or use it for a counter push, pairing it with things like a Graveyard. So it is just a very solid spell overall. And probably no surprise here, the Barbut once again is going in F tier. It's just practically useless in so many matchups, especially when you're playing against things like the Poison or the Earthquake. It's just so expensive, hard to use, and you can't really pair it in any deck. The Barbarians are going to go in D tier. I think one of the main reasons people play the Barbarians now is to eventually get to the evolved ones, because the regular ones are not really that good. They die to Fireball, or they're just overall pretty squishy and weak, which is why you mostly only see them inside of Lava Hound decks. Bats have actually made a bit of a comeback recently and are going in A tier. One of the biggest reasons why is because of the Cannoneer. A lot of people are using that now, and bats are a swarmy type of card, which does really good against people who are running Cannoneer. And also it's because of the evolved bats. People want to play them so they're able to get to the evolved ones, but even the regular bats are really good and very versatile now. You're seeing them inside a Giant Graveyard, of course minor cycle decks with the Wall Breakers, you'll see them with the bats, also Mega Knight Wall Breakers with the bats, and Mortars. So there's just a lot of versatility there, and they're pretty strong as well. The Healer, I'm going to put in F tier. You do sometimes see her with the Golem and the Elixir Golem, but a lot of Elixir Golem decks don't even use her, so I don't really believe that she's a requirement in most cases, and I think overall she's fairly weak. Battle Ram, I'm going to put in D tier. A lot of bridge spam decks don't even use it and would rather have something else, so it overall just isn't a very effective win condition, I feel like. Just because there's a lot of people running buildings and also stuns, it can be really difficult for it to reach the tower. The regular Bomber, I'm going to put in C tier. I feel like it kind of shares a similar story as the regular Archers. Most people are playing it to play that really broken evolved one, but the regular Bomber isn't bad. Of course, it's going to be pretty decent inside of things like Lava Hound and Goblin Drill decks. Bomb Tower will be the first S tier card. The main reason I'm giving it S tier is because of how many decks it's used in. You can use it with the Hog Rider, you can use it with the Royal Hogs, you can use it inside a Miner Cycle, you can use it with the Balloon, you can use it with the Goblin Drill, which is what we're commonly seeing now. So a whole bunch of cycle decks. It's just so defensive. Spells are not really that valuable against it, and the fact that it deals splash damage too just makes it so well-rounded on the defensive end. The bowler, I'm going to give A tier. Now, before the balance changes, I would have said he is S tier, but with how things are right now, the meta has definitely shifted a bit. We're not seeing nearly as much E-Giant, which was one of the things that the bowler paired very well in, and there's also less Goblin Giant, which is another thing the bowler was very good in too. With that being said, though, he's still very OP, and just on defense gets so much value because of all the health he has, which is why you commonly see him in decks that have the Tornado, or just with the Graveyard, or like I mentioned, inside a Goblin Giant. He can be really annoying. The cannon I'm actually going to put in B tier. Normally I put it in A, but I feel like the Bomb Tower and the Tesla are just way stronger of a building at the moment, and you just see them in more decks. With that being said, though, the cannon, of course, is still solid, which is why you often will see it with the Hog Rider, or sometimes people like to play it with the Goblin Drill, but I just think it's a bit weaker right now in the current state of the game. Cannon card, I'll put in D tier. You could even make the argument that it's F tier. I hardly see this thing anymore, and I feel like it's in very niche or off-meta decks that people don't really use very often. Maybe you'll see it in Mortar from time to time, or Bridge Spam, but that's about it. Clone is going in F tier. It's just hardly used anymore, and even Lava Clone is quite bad because there's so many people running the Tornado, the Arrows, and the Poison, so the Clone is just getting no value in those types of matchups. Dark Prince, I'm going to put in B tier. He's gotten a good amount of usage recently. You commonly see him inside of Giant Graveyard and also Sparky decks with the Goblin Giant, which are commonly seen in this meta. However, I don't really think he's too strong himself. He just happens to pair very well inside of those decks that are quite prevalent in the meta. The Dark Goblin, I'm going to put in C tier. I don't feel like it's a bad card by any means. It's actually really annoying and hard to deal with sometimes, but he just doesn't pair well in a ton of decks at the moment. You might see him sometimes inside of some off-meta Logbait decks or Mortar, but beyond that, you don't see him a whole awful lot. The Earthquake, I'm going to put in A tier. You mostly only see it in two decks, the Hog Rider and the Royal Hogs, but I believe it's one of the reasons why those decks are viable no matter what the meta is, because the Earthquake is what allows you to break through all those buildings that counter those two win conditions very well, and it's just amazing against things like the Elixir Collector, and even if the other person doesn't have a building, you can still cycle it on the tower for quite a lot of chip damage. The Electro Drag, I'm going to put in D tier. Sometimes it can be a little bit underrated, but for the most part, you're only going to see it inside of Golem decks, because Elixir Golem E-Drag you're not really seeing often anymore, and even Lumberloon with the E-Drag you rarely see, because those two decks have kind of fallen out of the meta. The Electro Giant is actually going into C tier. A couple months ago, it was one of the strongest win conditions in the game, but now it's kind of fallen off quite a bit. I think a big part is because of the massive meta shift that has happened recently. There's a lot more people playing buildings like the Bomb Tower, the Tesla, the Mortar, just tons of buildings that are really difficult for the Electro Giant to break through, and I think some of the evolutions getting added recently, like for example the Evolved Wall Breakers, are really annoying for Electro Giant decks to deal with as well. The Electro Spirit's going to go in B tier. Definitely a pretty valuable card for only one elixir, but I believe there's a spirit that is better than it by a decent amount, which is why I'm only putting it in B tier, and also you have to worry about that King activation, so you're not going to be able to use it in any deck that you want. The Electro Wizard is actually going to go into D tier. Sometimes I put it in C, but at the moment there's not really any deck where you really are going to be playing it in. Even P.E.K.K.A. nowadays, there's substitutes that you would want to use over the Electro Wizard, like Evolutions, for example. It's just not even a requirement in any type of deck. Maybe the off-meta Giant Double Prince deck you see from time to time, but there isn't really anything that requires it anymore. The Barbs are going to go into C tier. I feel like they're a fairly average card. Of course, mid-ladder players hate them, but there's not a whole lot of decks you see them in. I feel like they don't have great synergy with things, so they're oftentimes used in very spammy, annoying decks, or maybe bridge spam through Musketeers, but that's kind of about it. The Elixir Collector, I'm going to put in C tier. I feel like it's alright. Obviously, things like the Earthquake and the Poison are going to be very valuable against it, and things like Miner, but there's a lot of matchups where there's not much you can do against it if you don't have the proper spell, and I just think it's really annoying, and there are some decks it's very good in. For example, like Elixir Golem, Three Musketeers, or sometimes you'll see some funky recruit decks that go with it quite nicely. The Elixir Golem I'm going to put in D tier. I definitely think it's better than the Healer because there's a few different Elixir Golem decks I see from time to time. I think some of the evolutions have really helped it out. The Elixir Collector I was just talking about pairs very well with the E-Golem, and even at the top of ladder, there are some people using some E-Golem spam decks that are really obnoxious to deal with. I'll put the Executioner in D tier. I feel like it's not a bad card necessarily. The biggest problem is finding decks that have good synergy with it, which is why for the most part you're only going to see it with the Hog Rider and Hog X NATO, or sometimes you'll see it in Balloon decks, but that's about it. The Fireball is going to go into A tier. It's a very solid spell. Sometimes it's really nice to have that direct damage, so you'll oftentimes see the Fireball in things like Expo, Hog Rider, or Royal Giant, but I just think there's a few spells, or a couple spells at least, that are a bit better than it. With that being said, though, definitely a super good spell. The Firecracker I'm going to put in C tier. One of the main reasons why is she's not super versatile. You only see her inside of Hog decks for the most part, and it's pretty much a free king activation whenever you play against her. Now, whenever I rank the Firecracker, there's always people saying I ranked her too low, but there's a lot of people playing arrows, and overall there's just so many spells you can use to get a decent trade against her, like the Fireball and the Poison because you're getting Tower Chip, and don't worry though, the Evolved Firecracker I will rank much higher. Fire Spirit's going to join the Electro Spirit in B tier. I think it does a good amount of DPS, but it doesn't pair well in a ton of decks. I mean, you could use it with the Hog, Goblin Drill if you want, but it's not super OP besides that nice amount of damage it does. The Archer Queen is going to go into A tier. Definitely one of the strongest champions right now ever since she got that invisibility or cloak buff where she stays invisible a little bit longer, allowing her to get an extra shot or two. But I don't think she's super OP because there's a lot of ways you can counter her. I mean, even a lot of the spells are going to be good against her, but she just does do more DPS now, gets more value, so she's a lot stronger for sure. Fisherman I'm going to put in B tier. We already know the Fisherman's amazing inside of Royal Giant decks, but recently we've also seen him being used in some other things, like with the Recruits or even with the Goblin Giants, so we're seeing him be a bit more versatile now. Flying Machine I'm going to put in C tier. The main reason why is I'm only seeing it inside of Recruits for the most part, so even though the Flying Machine is what you would consider kind of an annoying card, especially if you don't have Fireball, it's just not really used in a whole lot of decks, and I think overall it's fairly weak and not that difficult to stop in a lot of situations. Freeze, I'm going to put in D tier. I think it's a pretty bad spell. You could even make the argument it's F tier, but I feel like Graveyard Freeze is kind of the one thing that saves it. And then, of course, Lumberloon Freeze you might match time to time. Furnace is going in F. There's not a whole lot I need to say here. It's kind of the same as the Barb Hut, where the spells are just getting too much value against it, and there's not really any deck you can pair it in. The Giant is B tier. I think it's a very strong win condition. I don't believe he's the reason why Giant Graveyard is as broken as it is, but we can't deny that Giant Graveyard is in a great spot right now, so he is definitely a pretty good card. Now, we don't really see him in other decks besides Giant Graveyard, which is kind of one of the reasons why I'm not ranking him higher, because no one is really running Giant Sparky anymore, or even Giant Double Prince. Giant Skeleton's going to go in C tier. I feel like he's pretty bad still, or just kind of on the lower end of average, even after that health buff he got. I haven't really seen him being played a whole lot more in the meta. He, of course, does have pretty good synergy. You could use him with the Hog, the Balloon, or maybe the Goblin Drill, but he's not really a requirement in any of those decks. Snowball, I'm going to put in B tier. I think it's a really good spell at the moment, especially inside of Giant Graveyard decks. You commonly see it. Has a lot of uses. That pushback is really nice. The slowdown, and it's only 2 elixirs, so there's just a fair amount of ways to get value with it, and it's pretty consistent. Goblin Barrel's going in D tier. I feel like it's pretty bad at the moment just because there's a lot of spells you can use to take it out, and bait is just not in an amazing spot now as it is. I think just as a win condition, argument could even be made that it's F tier, but I feel like no matter the meta, there's always some viability as far as bait goes. I'm going to put the Goblin Cage in C tier. I think it's kind of on the lower end as far as buildings go. You can use it with the Recruits, and sometimes you'll see what's called the Pompeo deck, the Balloon Goblin Cage deck. I think, though, the Brawler isn't really too scary to deal with, and the building itself doesn't have a whole lot of hit points, so I think it's kind of overall, but it's definitely not a bad card. The Goblin Drill is going all the way up to A tier. I believe it was the last list. I ranked it in D tier. It went from being one of the worst win conditions in the game to one of the best, and it's all because of the rework, which ended up being a massive buff to it, because that first Goblin now is almost impossible to stop. So you're almost always going to be able to get chip damage with it from that first Goblin before the opponent reacts to it, unless they predict where the drill is. Goblin Gang, I'm going to put in C tier. I feel like it's not a bad card, but just things like goblins and guards are going to be a better option than it. But you can, of course, use it inside of bait, mortar decks, and it'll be pretty valuable inside of those. The Goblin Giant, I'm going to put in B tier. It actually got 2 nerfs in a row. They first nerfed the Spear Goblins that was on its back, and they felt like he was still too strong after that, so they decided to take away half of the hit points buff he got, so they nerfed his hit points by 3%. Now I believe he's in a pretty good spot at B tier. He's probably around a slightly above average card in the game right now. He's still going to be, of course, pretty good as win condition, but now he's definitely not going to be OP anymore. The Goblin Hut is going into F tier. Honestly, I wouldn't mind to see one of these spawners in F tier getting just a small buff, because pretty much every single tier list, it's always these are guaranteed to be in the F tier, and pretty much all of them, it's the same reason. Spells are just too dang good against them, and they have no synergy in any deck. Goblins are going to go in S tier. Ever since there's been 4 of them, they just get so much value for 2 elixir. The amount of DPS they do, you can split them if you want, so 2 are going in one lane, 2 are going in the other. They're amazing at catching things too, for example, like the miner, which is commonly used, and they can just be played multiple times throughout the match, just getting an absurd amount of value. Golden Knight got a small buff. I'm going to be honest though, I still don't really think he's going to be that good compared to some of the other champions. His ability cooldown was reduced, but I don't really think that makes him a whole lot stronger, because even with that reduction, there'll be many times where you won't be able to use the ability again before it dies. So I think he's around C tier at the moment still. The Golem, I'm going to put in D tier. You could make the argument that he's C, but I really think he's one of the worst win conditions at the moment, mostly just because he's not really played a lot at the top of ladder, and I just feel like there's not a lot of versatility because of how expensive he is, and I feel like compared to things like the Electro Giant that are also expensive, he's just weaker, and he requires very specific pairs too. Like, oftentimes it's the same Golem decks you see, like they'll typically have the Elixir Collector and the E-Drag, so just other weaker cards that are used alongside with him. So I just think all in all, as a win condition, not that great. The Graveyard, on the other hand, is still going to be going in S tier. In the last balance change, it did get a small nerf, so now it spawns 1 less skeleton, but it's only 1 less skeleton, and for the longest time, it was the most broken win condition for the most part, so my prediction is 1 less skeleton isn't going to make a whole lot of a difference. The guards are going to be going into B tier. Ever since they got that buff so they survive arrows, we've definitely been seeing them a bit more, and they're getting a lot of value on defense, especially inside of decks like Lava Hound, Mortar. You'd use them in some other things too, even cycle decks. Pretty valuable. Heal Spirit's gonna go in C tier. I do believe it is the worst spirit. With that being said, though, it's not bad. Of course, you're gonna get some value with it inside of Bridge Spam decks, and it's like only 1 elixir, so it's like you're not gonna ever say it's like an awful card or it's like completely useless, especially because of how cheap it is. The Hog Riders going in A tier. I feel like it's one of the most controversial cards of the game because some people think that it's S tier and needs a nerf. Other people think that it's even lower than A tier and it's like really easy to counter. So obviously some bias going on both sides. Me personally though, I think that it is A tier, one of the strongest win conditions in the game for sure. It always stands the test of time, no matter what the meta is, no matter how many buildings people are using, no matter how many tornadoes, it always finds a way to work itself in the meta because there's tons of different types of hog decks and variations you can play. I'm going to say the Hunter's D tier. I feel like he kind of fell off a bit. Even inside of Royal Giant, you don't even see him a whole lot because most of the time people prefer to run Phoenix instead of him inside of Royal Giant. So there's not really a deck he's needed in. The Ice Golem, I'm going to say is D tier. Maybe you could argue it's C, but I think overall it's not really that strong, and most people would prefer to run things like the Knight or even the Valkyrie over it. But inside of 2.6, which is kind of old-fashioned and kind of fell off a bit, you could use it, and in Balloon you might see it a bit as well. The Ice Spirit's going in S tier, for sure the best spirit in the game. I think most people would agree with that. You can use it in so many different cycle decks. Obviously inside of Hog you could use it, Royal Hog Cycle, Miner, Mortar, among a whole lot of other things I might be forgetting. The fact that it just stalls everything for so long, it does splash damage too. It's like one elixir, so you can use it so many times throughout the match, keeping your cycle really cheap as well. Just so many reasons why it gets a lot of value. Ice Wizard's going in D tier. I feel like he's really bad and even worse now that the Little Prince is in the game, because the Little Prince now is even being used instead of the Ice Wizard inside of things like Graveyard. So you could even make the argument that he's kind of getting to the point where he's almost F tier. Inferno Drag's going to be B tier. I feel like for sure he's a better dragon than the baby dragon. I don't think it's OP though or anything like that, just because there's a lot of resets to it, of course, but of course it'll be really solid against tanks, and it's a really nice card to have inside of Lava Hound decks. Inferno Tower, I'm going to put in D tier. I think it's one of the worst buildings right now. I don't really see a lot of people using it compared to things like the Bomb Tower, the Tesla, the Cannon, the Mortar. Pretty much most of the buildings. There's a lot of people, decent amount of people anyway, running Lightning, and I think it's just a very expensive building, so it makes your cycle kind of awkward. The Knight's going to go into A tier. Obviously, a lot of people use him because of the Evolved Knight, but I think even the regular Knight has a lot of health and does a fair amount of damage for the elixir he costs, and is very versatile too. I feel like the Lava Hound is around C tier at the moment. I think it's a bit worse, especially with the Cannoneer being in the game, because the Cannoneer is pretty good against tanks, especially the Lava Hound, so that was kind of an indirect nerf to it. The Lightning, I'm going to put in B tier. I feel like it's just not versatile or used enough to justify it getting an A tier rank right now, because there's less people running E-Giant, but when E-Giant is used, you will typically see the Lightning almost every time. And then, of course, with the Royal Giant and the Goblin Giant, the Lightning is going to be pretty solid with those as well. Once again, the Little Prince is going in the S tier. It seems to not even matter how many nerfs this card gets. It just always remains in the S tier. I feel like at this point, they just need to have it die to Fireball. Otherwise, it just doesn't seem to matter how many nerfs they give it. It just gets too much value. I mean, the stats of it as a 3 elixir card, and then obviously champions in general, the aspect that it gives you a 3-card cycle, I think contributes to that. And then just the ability is insanely broken too, and the versatility of the card. Lumberjack's going to go in D tier. I feel like he's just not really that good. I mean, there's not really any deck you have to use him in, and a lot of the decks that he was good in kind of fell off, like Lumberloon, Golem. You don't even need to necessarily use him in Golem anymore. And yeah, I don't know. It's not like bad. Like, I don't think he needs a buff. He's not really needed in any deck. Magic Archer, I'd say, is B tier. After that 0.1 first attack buff, definitely going to help him out inside of P.E.K.K.A. and the Remieli deck with the Tornado and the Wall Breakers. I think we're definitely going to see him again, and he's going to be around an average or slightly above average card. Mega Knight, I'm going to put in C tier. I feel like Mega Knight might be one of the most average cards in the game when you think of what an average card would be. He's very good inside of Wallbreaker decks. Obviously, with the Wallbreaker evolution, that's probably helped him out a bit. But beyond that, you're not really seeing him anymore with the Ram Rider or anything like that. Mega Minion, I'm going to put in D tier. Honestly, I think it's just it just sucks compared to the Phoenix. There's just really no reason to use it. The Mighty Miner, I'm going to put in D tier. I actually think it's one of the worst champions, maybe even the worst champion in the game. Now that the Golden Knight and the Monk ended up getting a buff, he's kind of the one that ended up missing out. So I feel like potentially maybe they're going to give a buff to him soon, because he's definitely the weakest champion right now, I would say. The Miner, I'm going to put in S tier. This is another card that I feel like really just stands the test of time, kind of like the Hog Rider, but even more so. It doesn't really matter how many nerfs he gets or how the meta changes. He always finds a way to work itself in, and obviously right now with Miner Poison being as broken as it is and tons of variations of that deck, you can also use him with the Mortar and the Lava Hound, so you even have some more decks he can be played in besides just Cycles, so just all around a very OP card. The Minion Horde, I'm going to put in D tier. I really don't think it's that good right now. A big part of that is I think there's so many people running the arrows, the poison, the fireball delivery, just so many ways to take it out, and it just doesn't really pair well in any meta deck at the moment. I mean, maybe Mortar if you want to use it, or inside a Lava Hound, but it's not really a requirement. Minions, on the other hand, are a lot higher going into B tier. I feel like they're not quite as good as the Bats right now, but you do see oftentimes the Minions used inside of Goblin Giant decks, or Giant Graveyard, or just lava in general. They're not a requirement though. Some people prefer to run things like the skeleton dragons or just maybe another air card like the bats, like I said, but they're quite good. Mini P.E.K.K.A. I'm going to put in C tier. It does a lot of DPS, but I feel like the biggest problem with it is it's kind of a substitute card. Like, it's not a card you need to use in a deck. With that being said, though, when you do play it inside of things like, for example, Goblin Giant, it can be very useful sometimes. The mirror, as per usual, is going right into F tier. The fact that you have to spend one more elixir to play the same card is really annoying, makes your cycles suck, and more often than not, it's not even beneficial to play the same card again, because oftentimes the situation isn't even gonna call for it. I'm gonna put the Monk in B tier. I feel like it got a slightly bigger buff than the Golden Knight, because the Monk health buff is going to benefit it every single time it's being used, whereas the Golden Knight buff, it's not always going to help it because you're not always going to get a second dash. Whereas an 8% health buff, you're going to notice a lot of interactions being different, and I think we will see it back, especially with the Royal Giant and in Bridge Spam decks. The Mortar's going to go in A tier. I just feel like it's a very solid building, not just on offense, but also on defense. And then the fact, too, that you can run so many different Mortar variations. I mean, you could run it with the Miner if you want to. You could run it with the Goblin Drill. Sometimes you'll see that. In fact, sometimes I've even seen it be played with the Royal Hogs, maybe not recently. And then even just with the Miner variations, there's so many different kinds you could run. You could run the Skeleton King if you want, so you could run like a Beatty Mortar deck, or you could just kind of run an old-fashioned Miner Poison Mortar deck as well. So there's just so many options you can go with. The Mother Witch is going to go in C tier. It's kind of funny because I feel like she doesn't even counter Graveyard that well or as consistently as you would expect, because Giant Graveyard, for example, oftentimes can beat Mother Witch without too much of an issue. So I feel like her job of countering Graveyard, which is what she was known for, she doesn't even do that well anymore, so she's kind of fallen off a bit since then. I'm going to put the Musketeer in C tier. I feel like there's a lot of substitutes for her, so it's kind of similar to the Ewiz, but I do feel like she's a bit stronger than the Ewiz, just because you can use her in cycle decks from time to time, and she tends to pair very well, too, with the Balloon. Maybe Recruit's Balloon or just Loon Cycle. Night Witch, I'm going to put in D tier. I think she's pretty bad and not really used in pretty much any deck. I mean, you might see her in, like, Golem or some off-meta Giant Graveyard decks, but beyond that, not much. I'm going to put the P.E.K.K.A. in C tier. I think the range buff definitely helped her out a lot. I always was putting her in F tier in the last few tier lists, but even with the range buff, even though that helped a lot of interactions, and without a doubt the P.E.K.K.A. is stronger now, she's still fairly easy to distract, and against cycle decks, she oftentimes will not be getting that much value. The Phoenix is definitely going in A tier. For sure, one of the best flying cards in the game. I feel like it's replaced Baby Dragon and Mega Minion in pretty much all decks, because you oftentimes see it inside of graveyard decks. Golem, Lava Hound, Royal Giant, Goblin Giant, just so many different kinds of decks you can pair it in. Our next S tier card is going to be the Poison. Poison is just better than Fireball in so many situations, just because it deals more damage overall to towers, and also that slowdown effect. So it's able to kill things like the Little Prince, the Musketeer, the Ewiz, which is just so useful, the amount of value it gets. And then just paired with the Miner as well, there's just so many OP combinations of the Poison. Oh yeah, and it also is a good pair with the Graveyard, and it's also one of the only things in the game that you could say is at least a somewhat decent counter to the Graveyard too. The Prince is going into D tier. The Princess is also going into D tier. I feel like both of them are just not really that great. I mean, Prince you can use in Giant Double Prince from time to time, but that's about it. Princess, yeah, in bait, but that's the only time you see her, and oftentimes in bait, she's not getting that much value in a lot of the matchups anyway. Rage is going to go into B tier. I feel like it's alright. It's going to be good with things like the Goblin Giant or just Recruits, kind of decks that are pretty spammy and annoying, but I don't really think it's that OP. I think it's recently been toned down a bit because of the meta shift. Ram Rider's going in D tier. I think it's one of the worst win conditions in the game. You could even argue that the Ram Rider could get a small buff just because of how many buildings there are, all the stuns. It's practically useless, even paired with the Mega Knight or the P.E.K.K.A. It's hardly ever seen. Rascals are also going to be going into D tier, Rocket as well, so we got a few D tier cards in a row here. I just feel like the Rascals kind of share a similar fate as the Prince and the Princess, like, they're pretty much just seen in the same type of baity decks, but they're never really a requirement to be used. And then the Rocket, even though it's kind of a staple or like a must-have inside of bait, I feel like the fact that you can't Rocket cycle anymore because of the nerf it got to the tower damage it deals has really kind of made the card significantly worse. The Royal Delivery is going to go into B tier. For sure, a pretty underrated spell. I feel like a lot of casuals don't realize how much strength it has, but defensively it is absolutely insane, especially inside of minor decks is where you're going to see it a ton, but also inside of Royal Hog Cycle you're seeing it a lot right now too, and it's just getting a lot of value on the defensive end for only 3 elixir. I'm going to put the Ghost in B tier. I'm not seeing it a ton at the moment because bridge spam isn't super meta, but you can also use him inside of Royal Giant decks, and the splash he deals and that invisibility is very useful sometimes. The Royal Giant, I'm going to put in C tier. I feel like he's not really that great of a win condition at the moment. A big part of it is because of all the buildings, and I feel like he's pretty easy to counter, especially the regular one. I don't really think he is that good at the moment, kind of below average slightly overall as a win condition. The Royal Hogs are going to go into B tier. The only reason why they're not going to be higher than that is just because of all the bomb tower in the meta, and I think overall there's a lot of reliable ways to take them out, but Royal Hog Cycle and Recruits Hogs, of course, no matter what the meta is, it seems like they always are a pretty reliable option. Recruits, and just the regular ones, by the way, not the Evolve, I'm going to say they're C tier. I genuinely don't think the regular ones are all that difficult to deal with. I truly believe the main reason people play the Recruits are to get to the Evolve ones, because the regular ones are just very weak and easily counterable by even things like spells, like, you know, the Log is just very effective against taking their shields off, stuff like the Bomb Tower, or just like any kind of splash card or swarmy type card takes them out without too much trouble. Skarmory's going in D tier. The spells are just really good against it, and there's just no deck you even would use it in. Skeleton Barrel, I'm going to say is D tier 2. I do think it's better than the Skeleton Army, but overall, you're mostly just seeing it in off-meta decks, like maybe with the Mortar or Mega Knight bait, but it's not really a must-have in most decks. Skeleton Dragons are pretty solid. I'm going to put them in B tier right now. I feel like ever since they got that health buff, we've been seeing them a lot more. They're versatile enough too. They're quite nice to have in lava decks. You can use them in Fireball bait decks too. Maybe you want to pair them with the Royal Hogs or something, or use them in Mortar, so I think they're a pretty decent card. The Skeleton King, I'm going to put in B tier. I feel like it's kind of right now about an average champion in the game. It's of course going to be good when paired with things like the Tombstone or baity cards, but another commonplace recently where I've been seeing the Skeleton King is with the Elixir Golem, that there's this new Elixir Golem deck with the Bats and the Evo Skellies that is surprisingly becoming pretty okay in the meta, and the Skeleton King is in that. It's with Mortar, so it's a pretty, like, okay champion. It's not super difficult to counter, though. Skeletons, I'm going to put in A tier. I think they're pretty valuable. The fact that they're only 1 elixir, you can't really ever go wrong with them. It's just that in a lot of decks and situations, you would just be better off using the goblins. The Sparky, I think, is C tier. It's for sure a bit worse than the Goblin Giant, and because the Goblin Giant itself got 2 nerfs in a row, that's an indirect nerf to the Sparky, so I don't really think it can be put much higher than C, especially because there's so many Goblin Giant decks that don't even use the Sparky. Spear Goblins I'll put in B tier. They're a pretty decent baity card. You'll see them maybe in minor wall breakers, or in a couple variations of minor wall breakers, the one with the poison, but you could also see them with the Magic Archer Tornado one, or you could see them inside of Mortar decks and stuff like that. Surprisingly, guys, the Tesla is going all the way up into A tier. I'm not even joking. Recently, it has been almost as good as the Bomb Tower. So many people have been using it inside of minor poison for some reason, and with the newly buffed Goblin Drill, and it has just been pretty insane. It's not even because of the Evolve Tesla either, or because of Expo. It's because of the other cycle decks. People have been realizing how valuable it actually is, and it might have been too, it was a little bit underrated for a while. Ever since it got that buff a little while ago, it has kind of been back in the meta again. And I'm sure no surprises here, Log is going right into S tier. Doesn't matter what the meta is, it is always S tier. It is cheap, it does knockback, it is versatile, pairs well in so many decks, and it is just so broken too for that chip damage you're getting on the tower, and it's just, I feel like there's no sign of it ever leaving S tier in the history of this game, probably. Three Musketeers, I honestly think are D tier right now. I think, especially with the evolutions, they are even worse than they already were. Because I think before I usually would sometimes put them C, but I think they're D at the moment. I just think they're pretty bad and hard to play in this current meta. The Tombstone guys, I'm actually going to put in B tier. I feel like it's kind of toned down a bit. Normally it was always an A tier, but nowadays people are running Giant Graveyard a lot more than Splash Yard. And also, oftentimes Lava Hound decks don't use the Tombstone. They might use a non-building variation just with like the Barbarians or like the Inferno Drag, something like that, and they don't have a building. So the Tombstone isn't needed as much as it was before. The Tornado, I'm also going to put in S tier. I feel like it's the same as the Log, where it doesn't matter what the meta is, just the concept of the card is really broken. Just for King Tower activations, just pulling things away from your push or pulling things into your push if you're running E-Giant. It just completely can sometimes change the flow of the game, just the amount of interactions it has, and it is just super, super OP. The Valkyrie I'm going to put in C tier. I think she's not necessarily bad. It's just the issue is oftentimes that splash isn't really worth it for that one extra elixir, and you're just better off using the Knight in lots of situations. The wall breakers are going in A tier, and these are just the regular wall breakers, not the evolved. It's almost impossible to get a positive elixir trade off of them, and they're only 2 elixir, and you can't really ignore them. They deal a ton of damage to your towers, and even if you have a building, you're having to overcommit, overspend on that building just to deal with them. Honestly, I'm going to put both the Witch and the Wizard in F tier. I think the Wizard is probably slightly worse than the Witch, but at the moment, both of them are just really bad, especially with the spell situation. The poison is just amazing against them. I really would like to see a small wizard buff, though, for sure. I'm going to put the Expo in D tier. I think it's pretty hard to play. Obviously, there's a lot of people that are really skilled with it that can still have success with it high up, but there's just a lot of counters to it, and I think it's for sure one of the weakest win conditions in the game. The Zap I'm also going to put in D tier. Even things like the Snowball are just noticeably better than it right now, and there's really just no reason to be using the Zap, especially the regular one without the evolution, because it's pretty much only okay inside of Lava Hound, and even then you don't even need to have the Zap in that. Zappies are going to go in C tier. I feel like they used to be a lot better, but right now I'm only seeing them inside of recruit decks for the most part with the Royal Hogs. Now we're on to the evolutions. In my opinion, the best evolution in the game right now is the Evolved Wall Breakers. I don't even know how this card didn't get nerfed in the last balance change. That's probably the reason why, in my eyes, it's the best one right now. There's so many different decks you can pair them in. I mean, you can use them with the Mega Knight, you could use them with the Goblin Drill, you could use them with the Miner. So there's just a few different decks there, and then they're just so broken in and of itself. I mean, 2 wall breakers alone evolve pretty much take half of a tower for only 2 elixir, and like I mentioned for the regular wall breakers, yeah, you can use a building on them, but you have to overcommit, and if you don't have a building, you're basically screwed, and they are obnoxious to deal with. The second best evolution, which is also obviously going in S tier, is the Evolved Bomber. The fact that it's only 1 cycle is the main reason why it's so broken, and also the nerf it got in the last balance change isn't even a nerf to it in all situations. It got a bounce, just range nerf, but sometimes that helps the card, because now there'll be some situations where the bomb is on the tower twice instead of once, so it really just depends. The third best evolution is going to be the Evolved Skeletons. A lot of people thought these needed a nerf in the last balance change, especially a lot of the top players, because in cycle decks especially, they are so broken when you pair them with things like the Miner, and now that there's 2 evolutions in the game, you're often seeing them paired with the Evolved Bomber, the Evolved Wall Breaker, so they're just absolutely busted in so many cycle decks, and they're amazing against beatdown decks. Things like Golem, Goblin Giant, that's partly why you've seen some of those win conditions falling out of the meta a little bit, because when you don't have the proper spell and cycle, they're just killing all those ground cards with ease. They finally nerfed the Evolved Knight. They gave it, I believe, a health and damage nerf, so to those bonuses, it's a little bit weaker now, but overall, he is still one of the stronger evolutions inside of the game for sure. Still an S tier, but he is just noticeably worse in a lot of situations. Now he'll just die a little quicker than he did before, so at least he got some nerf, and he's not as broken as he used to be. Believe it or not, guys, next up is going to be the Evolve Bats. I feel like they're one of the most underrated evolutions in the game because a lot of casual players don't think they're that good. But recently, with the Cannoneer being in the game and the Evolve Bats being very good against the Cannoneer that shoots very slow, and also they have amazing synergy inside of Giant Graveyard, which is one of the strongest decks in the game right now, and they just pair well with a lot of evolutions. They tend to fit well with the Evolve Knight or the Evolve Skeletons or the Evolve Bomber or the Evolve Wall Breakers, so just their versatility is what really brings them up. Next is going to be the Evolve Archers. Even though they got that nerf that made them a bit worse, they are still definitely about average, I would say, when compared to the other evolutions, and still well deserving of S tier, just because that range and damage boost they get is absolutely insane, especially because they don't die to arrows either. Next up will be the Evolve Mortar. I feel like it's very valuable, especially on defense. The fact that it shoots faster and spawns a goblin, and then going in for it on offense too when your opponent is low on elixir can just be a big game changer, and I just think overall it's a pretty solid evolution. Still an S tier, but definitely not one of the most broken ones, but not one of the most weaker ones too. The Evolved Barbarians are actually going to be, I think, the last one that I put in S tier. Now, that's not to say that the other evolutions are bad or anything. It's just I'm trying to put it into perspective so you guys can compare it amongst the ranks of the other evolutions. The Evolved Barbarians, of course, are going to be amazing on defense, especially if the opponent doesn't have a proper spell in rotation. And then even on offense, they can be pretty insane because if left ignored, they can easily take a tower just because of that effect they have where they're attacking faster and they have more health, makes them very valuable. Surprisingly, guys, the Evolve Royal Recruits were definitely toned down quite a bit in the last balance change. After finally another nerf, they are no longer in the top 3 anymore, and they're actually not super obnoxious to deal with anymore. That's at least compared to the other evolutions. You have to keep that in mind, but they're definitely noticeably worse and a lot more manageable to defend now after the damage multiplier nerf they got again. Keep in mind, this is a little bit of a prediction because the Evolve Zap is fairly new, but I think it's going to be kind of on the weaker end in terms of the other evolutions. I don't think it's going to be one of the absolute worst evolutions, but I think it's going to be a little niche because I think the Zap doesn't pair super well in too many decks. You saw me put the Zap in D tier, so my prediction is the Evolve Zap is going to have a hard time making its way into cycle decks especially, and is mostly only going to be seen inside of beatdown decks. Next is going to be the Firecracker. I know a lot of people hate me on this whenever I put the Firecracker as one of the worst evolutions, but I think one of the biggest problems is that King activation you got to worry about, so she's not going to ever pair well in too many different decks, and you mostly only see her with the Hog Rider, and I think even though she doesn't die to arrows, when you learn how to defend her, she isn't super difficult to deal with. But with that being said, I could definitely understand why some people think she's annoying, and she's definitely not the worst Evo or anything like that. Next up, I'm going to do the Evolve Royal Giant. I'm not saying he's bad. I think all the Evos are good, and you're going to get a boost or a benefit from all of them. Obviously, he's a lot better than the regular Royal Giant, but I think even with that health buff he is getting, that health boost, and also that effect where he's damaging the units next to him, I feel like people have kind of learned how to defend him better, and especially if you have a building, I don't think he's that big of a threat and too OP. We're getting in our bottom 3 now. I'm going to do the Evolve Valk after the Royal Giant. I think that health boost that she got in the last balance change is going to help her a little bit, but the biggest problem with her is sometimes her ability is actually a negative where you're actually pulling things in that you don't want to, so it really just kind of depends on the situation. I also think the fact that she's a 2-cycle evolution kind of hurts her as well because she's kind of a medium cost card, so you're not going to be able to get her down, I think, as often as you want to either, and I think it's just very situational when she's getting value. Kind of like the Evolve Zap, this is a bit of a prediction, but I think the Evolve Tesla isn't that good. Kind of again with it being a 2-cycle evolution. Now, if they made it a 1-cycle evolution, I feel like that would potentially be way too broken, which is what we're seeing with the Evolve Bomber. But I feel like kind of like the Evolve Valk, maybe even more so, it's just very situational. I actually think the ability is the main thing that sucks about it. Probably the health boost of 20% that it's getting is the most significant thing, but I don't really think it's all that or anything too good. And then lastly, even though the Evolve Ice Spirit got a buff, it got a radius buff, I believe, I really don't think that's going to help the card all that much. I still think it's going to be the worst evolution in the game. So that's my tier list. What do you guys think? Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed.